Welcome, welcome, welcome to Week Old Beans episode, what I believe is 25. I am R. Dot, and I have my hosts with me.
I am Fowler. I am also on this show.
Always so weird. What is with the introductions with you, dude? It's like fucking crazy.
Well, since we're doing this relatively anonymously, the only thing I can describe myself as
Just
is
lie.
doing.
You will know. You can say you got a
You're right.
PhD in pussy. You can make
My
up any.
You're right. My name is Fowler the Third, and I am a PhD of economics from the London School of Economics, and I'm a professional giraffe wrangler
Yeah, why did you
for the
say
last ten
Fowler the
years.
Third like you're a fucking monarch? Like what?
I could be. You don't know. This is
True.
anonymous.
This is true. This is a very good point made by Fowler here. Anyway, we got a lot to talk about. We took a well no, we didn't take a hiatus last year or last week. We got a lot to talk about because a lot's been happening. So um I think the longest topic, and also let me go ahead and say, we're doing this on Zoom right now. We're recording this on Zoom, and Zoom apparently only allows 40 minutes of speaking for some stupid reason. So it might kick us off, and I will obviously restart and we will edit, but just a fair warning if mid sentence we get cut off, and we'll come back. But I
It should warn us so we can kind of time things a little bit,
yeah,
but we'll
should
see.
should being the optimal scenario there. So we got a lot to talk about. So we're going to narrow it down to two big things. One of the things I want to start with the shortest one because there's not much analysis we can do of this. Um, Big upset in both the Argentinian and Dutch elections. I mean, upset depending on what your viewpoint is on the matter, but
I
in
would say Geert Wilders is less of an upset because he's been a politician for I think like at least 2 decades up there. But Milei is definitely like an insane upset.
yeah, now I've Malay, after doing a little bit of research, he frightens me a little bit less than he did, in large part because apparently his party has. He won the presidency, but his party has virtually no majority in Parliament. I mean, I think his party has like 13 seats overall. Um,
Just to address the question itself, we're talking about Milei becoming the president of Argentina and Geert Wilders becoming. Did he get made the prime minister, or is it just his
no,
party
it's
that's
that his
growing?
party has
Yeah.
won the majority, putting him on the path to potentially becoming prime minister. But he
Hmm.
is not the PM. It's just that his party, um, the People's Party for Freedom and Democracy, um, or I believe that's the party.
Both candidates are known for being pretty extreme. Milei is a crazy man. He gets his campaign economic and policy advice from his clone dogs. That sounds like a joke. It's not. You
Yeah,
can
it's
look it
not.
up.
It's a real thing.
And he and
Unfortunately.
he doesn't believe in central banking, and I think he doesn't believe in currency. So he's
Well,
he's a wild.
he wants to convert the Argentinian dollar to or the Argentinian pesos. He wants to abandon the pesos and use the U.S. dollar, which would effectively tie Argentina's economy to the United States. Which, if you're like Fowler and I, and you are red-blooded, hot-blooded Americans, that's awesome. I love that. I like that he's essentially planning on giving the fate of Argentina's economy to the United States. Real big brain libertarian out here.
And the reason he won the election in spite of being a crazy man outsider is because it's like what, like 140%
Yeah,
inflation in Argentina.
140%. It's insane. It's ridiculous. The rate of
Argentina's
inflation.
having a Argentina's having huge problems economically. They're also having massive corruption problems. Milei is like hardline libertarian type, and he wants to like end five government departments. He wants to massively cut everything, and he just wants to reshape the economy in ways that are unprecedented,
Yes.
essentially.
His opponent, Sergio Massa, has been in office for quite some time, and from the research I've done on Massa, he's pretty much just the milk toast, moderate, corrupted politician. I mean, he's unimpressive, um, not very charismatic, and he was up against, the as people have called him, the Argentinian Donald Trump, which I at this point I really dislike that we are equating every single weird politician to Donald Trump because I think it does a disservice to uh, the fact that Trump is a fascist. And to my knowledge, I don't know, like Milei has said some cringe shit. In particular, he has downplayed the he has downplayed he and several members of his party have downplayed the dictatorship that occurred in Argentina in the past. But I don't know to what extent I mean, he's a libertarian, so he doesn't really believe in government. But I don't know to what extent he believes in the complete abolishment of government or the complete destruction of government. And I also don't know, if since his party has such a slim majority. I mean, it's not like the Republican Party here in the U.S. where it's half and half. I mean, his party has pretty much no chance of electorally taking the parliament, and it doesn't seem like the people. It doesn't seem like he commands the same sort of populist like radical fervor that Trump commands in the United States. So I'm
I think it's a harder position to build a cult of personality around yourself when you're a libertarian and you don't believe in government, like because it becomes hard to enforce your will. The more dangerous person is Geert Wilders. Geert Wilders is fairly liberal on a lot of issues, but the main thing that led him to rising to power is he is a vicious Islamophobe and he's extremely xenophobic. So he's combined progressive politics economically with hard right extremist perspectives about race and about immigration.
yeah,
So he's
particularly Islamophobia. That's the big, anti-Islam sentiment. That's the big thing, and the um, it, Islam has a much more contentious relationship in Europe than it does here in the United States. I mean, despite the fact that, interestingly enough, I mean, um, I've always thought that was interesting that maybe it's just because there's an ocean between us and the Middle East, so it's a lot more difficult for Muslim immigrants to come to the United States. So they come and they're vetted, a lot more aggressively. The United States, we have unbelievable vetting when it comes to allowing anybody from the Middle East into the United States.
well, I think the problem is that they had the Syrian refugee crisis and other events like that, which forced hundreds of thousands of immigrants into Europe. Like
Yes,
they're
and on foot. These were not, these were not people that effectively were vetted like we do here in the United States, and also their numbers are just in the United States. The amount of Muslims in the United States is lower, but um, so these are two pretty important shifts. I mean, the Netherlands and Denmark, they've prided themselves on being open, and but there definitely seems to be a shift. I mean, Maloney in Italy, last year, Poland. Has pretty much been shifting pretty far to the right on certain issues. You have Orban, um, and you have I know in Germany there's the potential for some upset there. Uh,
mm,
so we'll have to see. I mean, I'm gonna be watching these two very very. I'm gonna have to be watching these two politics. Or it's important that we watch these two politicians very uh, earnestly. I think Geert Wilders. He's gonna have. Is it Wilders' last name?
well, there's
Yeah,
yeah.
Waters. He's going to have to build coalition because, um, the Denmark is a multi-party, multi-party, parliamentary system. So, if you're a leader of a political party and you gain power in a parliamentary system, you have to build a coalition. And I think the majority right now, or trailing behind Geert Waters' party, is the pretty left-wing pro-environmentalist Green. I think it's the Green Party. I might be wrong. Let me check and see. This is what happens when Americans talk about geopolitics. Uh, um, Grow Links. I'm sorry. Um, the Grow Link Party, I believe, won the second most votes. The Grow Links is a merger of four left wing parties: the Communist Party of the Netherlands, the Pacifist Socialist Party, and the Political Party of Radicals, and the Evangelical People's Party. So that is his. That is who he is going to have to build a coalition with. The merger between two different communist and socialist parties of Denmark. So, we'll have to see if they're able to, build, build something together. Uh, so, any more thoughts about that, Fowler?
We're just going to have to see. I think populist waves are still occurring and populists are still doing upsets, but I would say that the peak of like the popular upsets is still probably 2016, 2015. We're seeing them still having influence in a couple countries, but it doesn't seem like um, it doesn't seem like they're completely taking over in the same way as sort of earlier in the decade.
It seems like very specific issues. I think that's what I find interesting about this sort of populist wave. I mean, the United States is a shit show, but our politics have always been a shit show. But in Europe, it seems like, you know, I know in Argentina, Milei's victory was in part. I mean, if you go and watch interviews with people in Argentina and voters in Argentina, I mean, it is a direct parallel to the 2016 election where you have people mostly voting for Milei not because they really think he's cool, but because they just don't want Massa to remain in office. And that's really hard. Or not even 2016. I would say 2020. I mean, it echoes the 2020 election where people were voting for Biden not because they really care about him and want him, but because he's not Trump. And I think if you're a populist leader, it's a very contentious position to be in when you don't command that cult of personality and people are voting for you not because they like you or they like your policies, but because you're not the other person. Having that be
Mm,
your start off, if you're like looking to be some sort of populist libertarian leader, is not a good thing.
mm,
Having that be the way you win, is not that is not that's not an ideal position to be in. I would say that Milei, if Milei wanted to be more successful, he should have been in the position that Trump was in 2016, where there was that aggressive pro MAGA, anti Hillary fervor. Um, so you want to move on to anything else? You want to move on to the most fun discussion that we're going to have today, which is Osama bin Laden.
R.I.P. to a real one.
Yeah. Said his name like the fucking Price is Right. Jesus Christ. And you've won a new airplane. I'm sorry.
Now we gotta burn this entire podcast. It's over. We have to start. We have to restart on episode one.
Fuck no. Catch me dead. All right. I'm fucking. I say what I mean. All right. Anyway, um, you went fucking piloting lessons at the jihadist school of aviation. Uh, anyway, do you want to? I'm gonna let you introduce. I'm gonna be quiet because I'm gonna say something else. You wanna you wanna introduce this one, Fowler, so I don't get myself in trouble.
So Bin Laden was trending on TikTok over the last week because he wrote a letter. I believe it's called A Letter to America, which was stumbled upon by TikTok influencers
As in TikTok
and
Zoomers, not just influencers. Some people,
TikTok Zoomer
most people were
influencers.
too young. But there were people that I saw. I'm like, you're too old to be doing this. But
And so basically, the letter was Bin Laden explaining why he did 9/11, and um, I mean, if the Zoomers don't know what 9/11 is, do we have to explain what 9/11 is? The worst terrorist attack in American history.
the worst
Uh,
terrorist attack in history, actually. I don't think it's just American history. I think it's considered the worst terrorist attack in the history of terrorism.
Crashing planes into the Twin Towers, killing thousands of people immediately, and then upon later, like the concrete became like I think gaseous and entered the lungs of firefighters and policemen who then died slowly of cancer. Just a brutal
Yeah, still to this day,
attack.
people are suffering the health effects. I mean, I would argue that we'll never know the actual numbers, but I'd say it's the amount of people that probably have suffered lifelong consequences due to inhaling toxic fumes is probably twice the amount that died on that day. But we'll never know.
Right. but some parts of political TikTok were
Tic
reading the
Tac.
letter he wrote. TikTok were reading the letter that they wrote and were essentially. I saw some that were like, "Oh, Bin Laden made good points," and I saw other people who were literally putting like when Bin Laden was right the whole time about that. And
Fowler, hold off. You're skipping. It's that audio connection.
I said, "What's the last thing I said?"
Oh, you were talking about last thing you said was the last thing that got picked up was about TikTok Zoomers and agreeing with Bin Laden. I think you did finish your sentence and then you continued saying something that probably honestly wasn't that insightful. No offense.
Well, then I think we've said what we had to say. So we're going to talk about why um why this happened, and I don't think we have to necessarily go into detail about why this is a bad idea.
Yeah, no, it's definitely one of those things where like on the surface level the analysis is like the analysis is should be nothing short of wow, um TikTok Zoomers have no brain cells. We already knew that, so I don't want to get into cognitive the cognitive abilities of the average TikTok Zoomer. Especially since I hope to post some of my own content on TikTok, and I would hate for them to stumble across podcast Week Old Beans episode 25, where I succinctly say that they are dumb as fuck. But um, I think a better analysis is honestly like talking about I think there's two angles you could take. I think one angle you could take is basically talking about how, like and I don't mean to again, Fowler and I have both shown our age many times on this podcast, but Fowler and I are of the pre 9/11 generation. So we were born before September 11th happened, right? Um
I was living in New York when September 11th
yes,
happened.
Fowler was in New York. I was not in New York, but I we were both not of the age where we were really able to understand the full extent of what had happened, but we were old enough to comprehend that something had happened. And we grew up, at a time when the effects of 9/11 were still being seen, when the political ramifications of 9/11 were still being seen. I don't know if a lot of people know this, especially people who were born post 9/11. But, departments like the TSA, I think the NSA, um, Department of Homeland Security, um, TSA, Department of Homeland Security, ICE, the Immigration Control, those departments did not exist prior to September 11th.
Yeah,
What?
September 11th changed everything. It's the rise of Islamophobia becoming national in America, and it was also the modernization and expansion of the police state with
Yes,
the Patriot Act and all these other things that allowed the American government to spy on American citizens, allowing us to torture people pretty much legally.
Guantanamo Bay,
Yeah.
creation of Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. Um,
So it's not was talked about as much as like Trump's effect on America, but it completely reshaped our foreign policy and domestically our security apparatus.
mhm. The Patriot Act expired in 2020. For those of y'all curious, uh, but like 2020, 3 years ago, the Patriot Act, this was a post-Trump expiration of a law. Um, but so for all you TikTok Zoomers who are posting this shit, just know like, um, like you would have been if you had done this shit post 2001, you would have been fucking, or a year after 2001, you would have been fucking, fucking juiced in a juicer. But that's not even the big thing. I think the thing that was just so shocking to me was how I mean nobody gave analysis. I mean if you go look up Bin Laden letters to America, if you can find it, because apparently it's being scrubbed. TikTok's not allowing it to trend, understandably, because TikTok is already in hot water. Uh, so it makes sense why TikTok is trying to censor the video because or the videos because they're already 2 seconds away from getting banned anyway. So the last thing they fucking need is for Congress to be like, hey, why on your website are a bunch of your users praising Osama bin Laden? But like if you look at the videos that are being made about it, they're not like analysis videos of like what Osama bin Laden meant. And for those of you who don't know, I'm not going to post a link to the letter honestly because you're not going to be able to find it, but I'll explain it real quick. Basically, what Osama bin Laden says in a letter to America is he correctly points out that the United States engages in anti-democratic behaviors overseas and stifles the self-determination of nations, particularly nations that are rich in natural resources and can provide the United States uh, with something. Bin Laden, points out that the United States does not act by the principles that it supposedly tries to uphold. He correctly points out that there are problems in the United States relating to wealth, uh, income inequality and a lack of redistributive wealth. And then he goes on to blame the Jews for all of this. And the first call in his proposition of, what can the United States do to change is a global conversion of Islam. I mean, uh, he laments and states that our downfall is, not due. I mean, he states it's due in part to income inequality, which is correct, but then he goes on to talk more about how it's the Jews and gay people that are really the problems in the United States and
And it's
are,
not subtle. Like he
yeah,
says in the letter explicitly that like the Jews control American politics and that they run the media, and it's extremely
yeah, it's just the
explicit.
JQ, but like from like a Muslim guy,
Hmm.
uh, along with hefty amounts of, I hate gay people.
It
So
shouldn't surprise us though, because anti-Semitism has become increasingly normalized in like American discussions. Like Tucker Carlson was the top Fox News anchor, and he pushed anti-Semitic conspiracies. And you have other figures within politics, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Jewish space laser lady. Like it's just become. I think it's less shocking now because in 2023, unlike like 2001, 2002, like to some degree, being anti-Semitic openly is has been normalized in
on both the
American.
right and the left, I feel too.
Yeah,
My analysis is basically, and it's one that people are not going to like. But my analysis is basically that the reason it's become acceptable, at least on the left, is because um, Jews are perceived as white. That's my that literally is why I think on the left, at the very least, it's become relatively acceptable to be anti-Semitic, or at least like push anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, because Jews are perceived as privileged and white, and the primary identity politics right now of the left is whitey bad. So if you're a Jew, and the other thing I think too is a supreme lack of education. So like if you're a Zoomer, and I think this is a true statistic, I think it's like a overwhelming majority of Zoomers don't really even know about the Holocaust. They don't really know about you know the Jews treatment during the Holocaust. They or the official numbers of the Holocaust. So you combine a shitty American education with, average American ignorance towards most topics. And I'm speaking specifically about, these online leftists that say this stupid shit on, TikTok, TikTok's doomer left wing woke generation. Um, a hefty dose of ignorance about historical geopolitics, along with um, whitey bad left wing politics, and of course, like you would be, it makes sense why anti-Semitism would be more acceptable because America doesn't really have the same sort of aggressive history of anti-Semitism that Europe does. We still have anti-Semitism and have had anti-Semitism in the past, but to your average, like woke fucking TikTok Zoomer, Jewish people are just rich whiteys. Uh, That's,
I don't know. I mean, I think it's been longer, but we've definitely. I mean, we have figures like Father Coughlin who were nationally prominent.
true, true,
A
true.
lot
I,
of a
I'm
lot of the un-American activities of rooting out communism was thinly disguised anti-Semitism. Like I don't think that we're the exception. I think most of the
oh,
Western world has always had like pretty deep problems. And if
I
you look at
definitely
hate crimes, they Jews are hugely disproportionately victims of hate crimes. Like
I don't
it's there's
disagree with
nothing
you.
close.
I'm not trying to excuse America's history of anti-Semitism. You know, I also think like when we talk about hate crimes, or when we talk about hate crimes, you also have to take into account uh radical organizations like the Nation of Islam, like the Black Hebrew Israelites, like several members of the Black Panther Party. It's not just like a Father Coughlin, you know, KKK, David Duke. It's not just them who have engaged in anti-Semitism. There's also hefty amounts of any of Black nationalist, Black communist radical circles. The Nation of Islam obviously being the most prevalent, but it wasn't to try and say that America should get off the hook. It was mostly saying, like that history of anti-Semitism is obviously not taught and obviously not something that most people know about. I think you and I are in the minority because we're history buffs, but I guarantee you, if you went up to somebody under the age of 26 and asked them, who Father Coughlin was, they would have no idea. Uh, or if you asked them, what are some of the beliefs of the Nation of Islam? They would say, well, they believe in black liberation, and that's about all they get to. They would have no idea about your boy Yaqub. Uh, they wouldn't know about any of that shit. And so, uh, combining that with the current sort of framework of left wing, or at least far left identity politics, which is whitey bad, it's not surprising uh, that anti-Semitism will become, in a political sense, more excusable, or at least relatively excusable. Um, so that's number one to me. Like that's what stuck out to me. I would say more than anything, along with just a severe lack of a severe lack of. I don't even know if they read the letter. I mean, that's what's shocking to me. I mean, I saw videos of blue-haired, nose pierced, LGBTQ people who were stating that the letter was based in red pilled. And what's interesting is in the letter he directly says that if you're that America's downfall is because of over our over fornification and our acceptance of LGBTQ people. um, do you have any? I'm sorry, I'm rambling off, Fowler. Do you have anything else? You got any analysis? All right.
I think that the TikTok bin Laden stuff, I think it kind of reveals why, and neither R dot or I are really pro Israel. Like, we both have sort of said that they're committing war crimes and it's unexcusable the level of civilians that have been killed and a lot of the targets like hospitals or transportation vehicles that have been hit. But I think like the TikTok bin Laden letter really shows like why the pro-Israel people are so fervently pro-Israel. It's because of how commonplace anti-Semitism is and how a lot of people feel like the Jews need a homeland because it's not safe for them anywhere else. And I think the letter really demonstrates that. Like, imagine being Jewish, being a Jewish American, and you wake up to consume the news and you see all these, you know, everyday looking Zoomer fucks like praising Bin Laden as he writes an anti-Semitic screed about how the Jews control everything, and he wants to destroy them all. And you have to live in the world like that. And so I think it kind of reveals a little bit of the complexity of the Israel-Palestine conflict and why the pro-Israel side are just so fervently pro-Israel.
Yeah, and it's in the left, the online left, and I think we have to. I think we have to make sure that we make a distinction between the online left and like the functioning left. And I don't know to what extent on like the functioning left this sort of issue is coming up. But I definitely think like, and Fowler and I talked about this yesterday, and the point I basically made was, it is, while it might be a minority of people, I think it is concerning in large part because the generation that's currently in office and currently, has a hold on things, the Young Turks, Sam Cedar, those leftists, the ones that have their foot in the door of both worlds, like that they're only as good as their audience is. Their opinions and their viewpoints are only as powerful as their audience allows it to be. And, right now I would imagine the people viewing that, viewing the Sam Cedars and the Young Turks of the world, like, there will be a new generation. There will be, a new base that begins to come up and sort of change things. And if you have that base, if that base consists of TikTok Zoomers talking about how based and red pilled Osama bin Laden's letter is, that's concerning, even if they don't understand it. Now, I don't think, like, I genuinely don't believe for a second that a lot of the people who read Osama bin Laden's letter to America read past the first two paragraphs, or if they read it, they just kind of like stared at it and understood that there were big words being said, and the big words being said were that America bad. And like with some of the people, I genuinely wonder if, like, they're intelligent enough to catch the anti-Semitism, although it is pretty glaring. So you would have to be like pretty dumb to fucking not catch it. Like, it's not like it's like dog whistly. I mean, he says, but also like, also like, Fowler and I are in the minority of Americans who, and we're not trying to toot our own horns here, but like, we are of the minority of people whose interest in the topic has led us to studying professionally, um, materials, and learning how to dissect, particularly media. So, like, he and I are trained in the art of recognizing, um, essentially the art of media analysis and literary analysis, but not everybody is trained in that way. For a lot of these
Yeah.
people, this letter is the longest thing they've read since fucking elementary school. Like, like, if they read the whole thing, for a lot of the people reading it on TikTok, that 4 page is like the longest they've read anything since like eighth grade.
We're increasingly seeing, 15 years ago, people preached the idea that the mainstream media was corporate and there was gatekeeping to ensure that only certain viewpoints, more moderate viewpoints, were allowed on their programming. And there's all these biases. Noam Chomsky actually made most of his career writing about those biases and how the media serves as a vehicle of propaganda for hegemonic influences. But we're seeing the dark reverse of the fact that alternative media, it's because there aren't those gatekeeping elements, because it's democratized to everyone. Like, you don't have to go to journalism school and be an Ivy League shithead in order to like have millions of people listen to you. And one of the downsides of democratizing everything is things like overt anti-Semitism or praising figures like bin Laden, they're more possible. And so I think we're going to see increasingly that um, younger generations that consume new media, they're going to be way more susceptible to misinformation of this kind in the future. And this will definitely affect elections. It will definitely affect discourse, and not always in a positive way either.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, the I've heard from people that, like, oh, like, because the younger generations have more access to media, that means that they're better at dissecting propaganda. Um, but I think I think this is an example of that not being the case, or at the very least, like, like, just because you can detect something doesn't necessarily mean that, like, you have the capabilities of that doesn't mean that your political leanings or the way that you steer is going to be aligned with whatever biases, whatever
Well,
biases.
I think it's one thing to avoid propaganda in an earlier generation when all the media isn't interconnected and when it doesn't literally as a design create bubbles. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I think it was way easier with a less developed media back in the day to avoid misinformation, but now, like, you consume political content that's like left or right, and you just will be able to enter echo chambers. And it's I think it's almost impossible to escape echo chambers when they're all that you consume. You know
Or
what I
the
mean?
algorithm is and the algorithms that are used are made to cater to that. I mean, your all social media that you use, the algorithm caters to your specific taste. I mean, if you start watching videos about Donald Trump on YouTube, YouTube will show you those same videos. Um,
Yeah.
if you start looking up, left wing content on Twitter or on Instagram, like your feed automatically, I mean, after the first two searches, it caters to that, almost, grossly so. I mean, it's like I do research into right wing ideas. I study and look at right wing ideas, and whenever I go on fucking YouTube now, let's say I decide to check up on what Candace Owens is doing, for fucking 3 days later, my entire feed is just Candace Owens, Candace Owens, Candace Owens, Jordan Peterson, Jordan Peterson. And I'm
Mm.
like, and it's immediate. Like it's not even within a day that the algorithm detects. Oh, she's fucking looking at Candace Owens, so we're gonna show her Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder and Charlie Kirk and all these people.
And it affects everyone. A story that we will mention, but will not have time to get into it, is Elon Musk recently got in hot water, and all these advertisers fled Twitter because he basically
$75 million lost, by the way.
yeah, because he agreed with a post basically saying like, isn't it hypocritical that Jews push against anti-Semitism, but they push anti-white hate? So like the algorithms in these bubbles are strong enough that even the richest man in the world is able to fall victim to them. A man who literally controls the algorithms to some degree is himself a victim to them.
Yeah. Um, I mean, God, my analysis of this was I was heated yesterday. I was pissed off. So for those listening, and you're like, wow, R dot's really fucking pissed off about this Osama bin Laden letter. I think it's just because I'm seeing the things I predicted 2 years ago become true. Like I've always said, like, like you just have to be so careful about the company that you keep, and there are a lot of very disturbing trends that I see brewing in sort of the more online left, that I am worried about, and that I think are not really, productive. It's the Vampire Castle, you know, coming full circle. For those of you who don't know, if you get the chance, exiting the Vampire Castle, really really good article about the. It's written in 2014. It's almost 10 years ago. It will be 10 years ago next year, but the things spoken in that article are, shockingly relevant, even to this day. The only difference is that it seems like we've just amped that shit up to 1,000 since
Mm.
the article was written back in 2014. So it's if the trend continues, like it's going to cause real issues for any sort of like left wing organizing. And it's going to cause real issues electorally as well. Um,
Mm.
I'm not saying some of the sort of reactionary backlash is justified, but I mean, it's like, yeah, it's like it makes sense. It's predictable.
We'll have to see when the Zoomers become more and more the people creating the media, how they lean. Although we're already having problems of um, kind of crazies increasingly having positions of prominence. Benny Carolla was a trans TYT host, and TYT is pretty consistently sock them, territory. But she's like, they ended up getting rid of her. I think she quit, but she like openly praises North Korea. So I think we're just going to have to see in this new media landscape what sorts of people gain prominence and what things they believe, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Absolutely. It's We're gonna have to see, and we're gonna have to see, how it. What I'm interested in is when this new media landscape is created, how it influences the real world and whether it does influence the real world. I mean, I think honestly, we didn't really talk about this because it doesn't really relate to the Bin Laden letter, but I think it's relevant. I mean, I think what was it you said yesterday, Fowler, about how you think that the media and the politicians severely underestimated the reaction to the Israel Palestine conflict.
Yeah, I mean, I've read before about how like the Vietnam War changed everything because it was the first time American citizens, not just soldiers, were able to see the horrors of war. And you could see on your television like women being raped and children being murdered. And I basically said like I think the Israeli conflict in the internet era, like I don't think you can get away with total war anymore in the Western world and survive. Like that the public is going to turn against you. Inundated with videos of hospitals being blown up and children being like burn victims. So I think we're seeing that. Like there's the mainstream media is normally quite apathetic and pro establishment, but even they like on CNN, Jake Tapper was interviewing Doctors Without Borders employees, and like they were doing like main story news about like them watching the Israeli military just destroy innocent civilians. So I think the war might turn, um, and American sentiment might be anti-Israel if this continues the way that it has.
Yeah, it's um and I think, like, looping it back around to what I was saying about how, we'll have to see how the online left, the Zoomer generation, how they lean. I think that this is a really good indicator that, the Israel Palestine conflict has been a main topic of discourse amongst the sort of like online left since 2014. So, I mean, I knew about, I was dabbling on, online left wing spaces, way before, I mean, before Trump was elected, but especially when Trump was elected, even when he was elected in 2016, there was still, the narrative and the discourse was still very pro Palestine. And I think, that generation is the generation that did take to the streets and protest. And, you know, and I don't know, and I think, like we said earlier about the anti-Semitism, I think it is really scary. I think it's scary because, like, um, I think it's scary because I know that the right, which is definitely anti-Semitic, or figures on the right, or online right-wing spaces are also fighting because they're kind of like doing the opposite, where they're saying like they're not, a lot of them are Nazis, so they don't want to support Israel because they're Nazis, but then they also the more establishment, like pro Israel right wingers are scuffling. So there seems to be scuffling. It seems like the issue has caused scuffling on both sides of the political spectrum. Um, it's kind of a shit show. That's all I can say about it.
Israel is a geopolitical ally that we use to keep a hold on the Middle East. So I think what we're seeing is we're seeing the far right and far left, who are isolationists by nature, being antagonistic to sort of that imperialist um, U.S. empire in a way that a lot of the traditional old school Republicans and Democrats are pretty pro. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. It's really interesting.
What time are we running at, by the way?
Oh, we're about, yeah, we should be about done. I mean,
Okay.
about 45. I think that's a good enough discussion. I mean, I didn't really offer, I feel like, much of analysis of the Osama bin Laden shit, but there's not much you can really say about it. Outside of, holy fuck, That's what I said when I saw it. I don't use TikTok, by the way. I'm trying to start, but for those of you who are like, how did she not know? I don't step foot on TikTok. I think it's a toxic place. I think it's equivalent to the crater in Fallout 4 where they drop the nuke. That's how I view TikTok. Um, so I just, because it is the hotbed of riveting political analysis nowadays, I might have to get on it and start posting content on there. Sadly,
I'm an old man. I don't have the time.
yeah, Fowler's like 175. He doesn't know how a computer works, and he also wears suspenders. Like it's the fucking
You're all you're describing is George R. R. Martin.
Yeah, but you weigh probably like 200 pounds less than he does. So all right. So I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. It's such a lame egg. I'm gonna let you do the outro, Fowler. You never do the outro. You always do the intro.
Thank you for listening, and we will see you in the next video.